What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today I am going to be discussing with you the BEK, Black Eyed Kids. Now, the first thing I want to say is, excuse this hot mess, but something really strange just happened, and I'm a little blown away by it. And it took me a lot more time to figure this out than expected, so that was less time for all this. Anyways, so about a week ago, I went through my first BEK videos script, and I went through the second BEK videos script. I was going to sit down one night this week, it ended up being tonight, and combine them to do a whole new, just part one of BEK with both videos in there, and then take it from there on a new series. Everything was there. I went through the entire scripts. I made some changes. I didn't combine them yet. I kind of left them as is. I changed some things around and saved the information. And then when I sat down tonight, I looked, and the first and last page, each script was 3 pages long. The first page and the last page of each script is missing. So I have no idea what could have happened. My stuff automatically saves. I've never deleted any script right from the first one I ever did, Joey Lynn Offit, last May of 2020. So I have no idea what's going on. And you guys know me, I'm not a BSer, like I'm not joking. So I kind of compiled this together, but don't worry, there's going to be much more on the BEK to come very, very soon, because I'm a little kind of freaked out about this. No joke. So I kind of put something together, but I hope it makes up for it that I included our very own Steve Stockton's BEK encounter in this one. So without further ado, let's get started. As I sat writing this, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was still really, really super dark here in northern New Jersey. I was drinking my coffee and I was vaping, and I couldn't help but feel like this fear creeping up on me as I sat at my dining room table reading the stories, typing out the stories, just researching the BEK in general. My chair was facing my huge uncovered bay windows with my front door also with a large uncovered window on it staring right back at me to my right. It was like a BEK's dream, in other words, because there was nothing for me to hide behind if they were to come knocking. Now I do my research upstairs. Not that that's much help, as we'll see. The BEK, also known as the Black-Eyed Kids or Black-Eyed Children, are creepy beings that take on the form of children, usually looking to be between the ages of 6 and 17 years old. They are almost always dressed in either tattered or out-of-date clothing, and their language skills seem off, as do their mannerisms. Think about it. Why are they knocking when most people have doorbells? Most of the time they appear at night, usually in the middle of the night, and almost always appear to adults. Almost always. There are certain and few exceptions to those two rules, but that's normally how it is. Usually the victims are home and, again, almost always alone. Although there are certain exceptions to this, as there has been a story or two that I've come across where there was another person or other people in the house, but they were fast asleep and unable to be woken up until the interaction with the children was finished. It's kind of like what we talked about in the alien hybrid video that I did, the part 1, which, by the way, part 2 coming soon, where the other person or the other people in the house, while the abduction is going on or the visitation is going on, seem to be kind of switched off. I think this also happens sometimes during sleep paralysis, but we'll get into that further in that series as well. If you've been following me for a while, I have like 5 different series going. Don't worry, there's new videos for all of them coming up. So anyway, I'm pretty sure that the other people in the house get switched off. They'll ask for random favors from the unsuspecting victim, and it seems like they like to play on human emotions such as concern and guilt and even mothering sometimes. I say this because most of the time, they'll be sure to come off looking as small and as vulnerable as possible, and they'll approach with their heads down so you're unable to see their horrible, soulless eyes, and say things like, "We're lost and need to call our mom. Can we please come in and use your phone?" If this doesn't work and they're rejected, they will then most likely ask if they can use the bathroom, anything to gain entrance into your home, but with one condition. You must invite them. In story after story, it's the same exact thing. The victim hears the knock, and immediately there's an extreme and very basic and visceral sense of fear and dread that takes over their entire bodies, all before even answering the door. There have been times when it's been claimed these children can even see through the door and start speaking to the victim before the door is even opened. They also get more and more angry, mean, and aggressive as they are repeatedly denied entrance into your home. I've spoken about it before, and I'm not sure I believe any of the stories of the people who have let them in, that at least the ones that I've come across so far, as they're really few and far between, and I just don't know. I just get a not true feeling from most of them. All of them, actually, if I'm being honest. Except one. There is so much to these stories, so many things the same with a couple of few differences sprinkled into a story from time to time. Thank God I have no personal experiences to recount to you all. I'm going to discuss some theories at the end, as I have personally quite a few of these, and some are quite out there, so beware. But so is believing in the black-eyed kids themselves, some might say, right? So here we go. Grab a snack, turn down the lights, be sure and lock your door. Oh, and draw your shades too, because they aren't above peeking in and knocking on your windows as well. And no high rise, no matter how high up you are, is going to deter them or save you. Anyone even remotely familiar with the black-eyed kids are by now familiar with the Texas journalist's eyewitness account in a parking lot of a movie theater in 1997, which he then posted online, and the internet went wild. Suddenly, more and more people were coming forward with their own terrifying, blood-curdling encounters with these strange and inhuman children. I don't think it's because, as most skeptics allege, that the stories are fake and it's easier for people to perpetuate them, pass them off as real, and have them be more widespread because of the internet, but I think it's exactly the opposite. I believe it simply gave other people the courage to come forward with their stories in the beginning of the time of the internet. I wholeheartedly believe, as I've said, in the black-eyed kids and have tons of stories to tell. If you aren't familiar with Brian Bethel's story, don't fret, because it's coming in the next video. Like I said, I reiterate, I had to kind of throw this together pell-mell because the first and third pages of both my scripts were missing, and I have to get something recorded. So you guys know me, completely fluttery, but okay. So Brian Bethel's account and the other accounts that I wanted to talk about tonight are coming in a very recent video. I'm going to try to film it right away for you guys. So tonight I'm going to discuss with you guys Steve Stockton's story. I thought you'd get a kick out of that. Some of you might have already seen me tell it, but it was a really long time ago. I was going to reboot it anyway because I am not happy with it. So let's hear Steve's story first and then talk about what the BEK could possibly be. So the first thing Steve states before recounting his story is that every time he recounts the story, something sinister and unexplained happens to him. He's part Cherokee, just like I am, and says how he's always reluctant to retell the tale of his encounter because of the old Native American legends about how if you speak of things like this out loud, you could be inviting it to you. Manifestation, right? I definitely agree with that, and sometimes that's the scariest thing of all for me. What kind of juju am I bringing upon myself in retelling the tales of everything that I talk about, not just these strange and horrific looking children? This story can be heard told in the first person point of view of the victim, because yes, I believe that anyone who encounters a BEK is a victim. On the channel Missing Persons and Mysteries, and the title of the video is Black-Eyed Kids Stories Halloween Special. Steve says he was leaving work late one night, super late. He had a freelance job at the time and would go in and work after the regular employees all left for the day. So he finishes up his work and he says he left the building at about 2 o'clock in the morning and was carrying some things, equipment and his tools to his car, which at the time was one of those tiny little Mazda Miata convertibles. These cars are just 2-seaters. They're super small. He reminds us that this building he is working on is in an industrial area, so there are no houses nearby at all. His hands are full of all of his work equipment, and he says he notices that, quote, way over at the edge of the parking lot, there's 2 little girls sitting on the curb, end quote. It immediately struck him how strange and uncommon this was, keeping in mind the area and also that it was 2 o'clock in the morning. The top was down on the car, and he started loading his gear into the tiny little trunk of the Miata. He joked at this point that the trunk on these cars is not much bigger than the glove box on a lot of cars, and it's a bit like Tetris to try and fit a lot of stuff in the trunk. So as he's struggling to get the equipment into the trunk, he noticed that the two girls have now stood up. He said the larger of the two girls looked 11 or 12 years old, and the smaller one looked to be about 9 or 10, so not so much of an age difference between the two anyhow. So all of a sudden, he hears the taller one start talking. She wasn't talking to him, but she was actually talking about him to the smaller girl or the younger girl. Steve said, and it was almost like a litany, with the girl stating over and over and over again, he'll give us a ride. He'll let us in his car. He'll have to let us go. He can't leave us out here. We're lost and scared and it's 2 a.m. He'll have to give us a ride. He'll let us in his car. He's not going to leave us stranded. Just repeating all of this over and over and over again, nonstop, the same few sentences to the other girl. The smaller girl wasn't responding at all, just standing there quietly, seemingly listening to the incessant chatter of the bigger one. And this is very typical and very common in these stories or encounters. There always seems to be a bigger one who does all of the talking while the smaller one just stands there looking either fidgety and nervous, or sometimes the smaller one will be standing almost inhumanly still, not moving at all, even looking like they're not breathing. So Steve turns away from the girls and goes back to trying to load all of the equipment into the trunk of his car. When he turns to look again at the girls a minute or two later, they were now halfway across the parking lot. Steve said he didn't actually see them move at all, but they somehow were much closer to him when he looked up. A minute or so after this, he looked up again and he said, and this time they really closed the distance. I didn't see them walk. They were only walking when I wasn't looking, I presume. At this point, the two girls were under one of the lights in the parking lot, like a street light, and he could finally see them better. He said they were dressed oddly. He further describes their attire by stating they were wearing very plain and simple clothing with darker colored pants and dark hoodies or sweatshirts with the hoods pulled up. The reason this is so odd is because they were inappropriately dressed for the very warm weather. He couldn't see their faces still though, and said, it still looks black in there. Meaning he could only see, like he couldn't see anything inside the way the hood was up. This is another really common thing when it comes to the BEK. They'll be inappropriately dressed for the weather, especially if it's warm out, because they're trying to wear clothing that's going to cover their eyes, cover their face, so that you don't see that until the last minute. And I presume, hopefully, you'll let them into your car or your house or whatever before you see their eyes. Because it's like, no take backs. You said we can come in. Can't take it back now just because you saw our eyes. The taller girl at this point was still talking, quote, at 90 miles an hour, end quote. She was still repeating, he won't leave us out here. He'll let us in the car. He won't leave us stranded. He'll do it. He won't leave us here. He'll let us in. Steve said at this point he was really getting spooked because every time he looked up, they were closer to him and had closed more distance, all while the taller girl babbled and incessantly repeated herself. He looked up once again, and this time they are directly under the streetlight, and he can finally see their faces. He stated, and all I could see that they had the biggest, blackest eyes. I mean, like, so black as not to exist. It was that type of black. A pitch black. If you've ever been in a cave underground with no lights on, it was that kind of darkness. Just an inky blackness for the eyes. Now that was an exact quote, and we know our Mr. Stockton, he doesn't stutter. He did though. Meanwhile, the taller girl was still repeating the exact same thing as she had been up until this point, over and over and over again, while the smaller of the two just stood not only silent, but also non-reactive. Steve stated, and like I said, I just felt this fear start rolling over me in waves. And now, to tell the story, it seems so ridiculous. It's just two little girls. He said the fear didn't make sense to him, even though he knew the circumstances were odd, being that it was 2 in the morning in the middle of a business parking lot in the industrial area of town, and there's 2 little girls standing there, one of them just incessantly jabbering. He just knew it couldn't be a good thing that 2 little girls want to ride in a 2-seater car in the middle of the night with a strange man. Steve said, first off, I'm not going to put 2 kids in the seat of a car that's meant for 1 person, and I don't want to be out running around under those circumstances, 2 o'clock in the morning with 2 underage girls, you know, in a car. Steve once again starts recounting the fear he felt from these 2 kids, and he says, But you know, the fear that I felt come rolling off those two, even now when I talk about it, I get a little antsy. It's just every time I talk about it, I relive it. He said he never felt such real fear like that. He described it as a real fear, fight or flight type thing. He likened it to a live rat being thrown into a pet snake's cage, the fear it must have when it senses the snake and knows it's trapped. Steve and I have both actually seen this. We've each been in the presence of pet snakes and have actually seen the look on the rodent's face when it first senses the predator. Doesn't even have to see it, just senses it. I loved this analogy because it seemed to sum up the fear feeling, not just he, but everyone who has encountered these kids, these beings, seems to be grasping for the words to explain. I feel like he captured it right there. He used a mouse as an example, not a rat, but he said he felt like the mouse, stating, well, that's how I felt, just like that mouse, just such an overwhelming fear that it was really beyond fight or flight. Steve mentioned a couple of other times when he had had some kind of paranormal experience, and he said he hadn't ever felt a fear like this. He called it, quote, strange and irrational, end quote. So by this point, he said he had gotten his things into his car and he was fumbling to try and get the keys into the door so he can get the heck out of there and away from these kids. He had left the top down, thankfully, and said since he was having trouble getting the car door open, so he just hopped over the car door and kind of jumped into his seat. I picture him doing that, and I'm sorry, it's funny. As far as these kids, at this point, they're just a few feet from the car. According to Steve, they were just standing there staring at him, but the taller girl was still incessantly repeating the same thing over and over again, but still not directly to Steve, but about him to the smaller girl, still completely mute thus far as well. He'll give us a ride. He won't leave us out here in the middle of nowhere. We're stranded. We're lost. We're cold. We're wet. It's late. Steve had trouble getting his car started too, but finally was able to get it moving. And he said by that time they were so close to the car, they could have just jumped in if they didn't need the invitation. Steve just floored the pedal and said he didn't even bother turning right or left to exit the parking lot as normal. He actually drove over some grass and a curb to get out of there and away from these kids as fast as he possibly could. And that's just what he did, not even bothering to look in his rearview mirror, as I'm sure if he had done that, there would have been no one there to be seen. Steve also stated that he had a girlfriend at the time who only lived a couple of miles away from where this incident took place, that he usually would have gone right to her house after working so late at this particular job. That was kind of his routine on certain nights. He said that that thought didn't even occur to him to go there to his girlfriend's house, though. He ended up at his parents' house, which was about 15 to 17 miles away. I wonder if this was still his fear instinct kicking in and trying to get as far away as possible from whatever those girls were, from those black-eyed kids that he encountered in that parking lot that night. I want to discuss just a couple things about Steve's encounter too. The not being able to start the car right away. This is also something that comes up time and time again, the malfunctioning of automobiles, cars, the malfunctioning of doorbells, light bulbs exploding, or light switches not turning on and off in general. They have some kind of control over mechanical things, engines, things like that, but it seems to only be either a temporary hold or not a very strong one because eventually the cars do start again. It's like they're stalling for time. I find that very, very strange. Steve's very lucky he didn't get into an accident, as a lot of people who were said to have fled the BEK after they got that close did in fact get into an accident. In Brian Bethel's story, he said pretty much the same thing, that it was that fight or flight instinct that he just took off. He didn't care if he ran anything over, like as long as he was getting away from these kids. Brian Bethel did look in the rear view though, and again, that story's coming. Steve, I want to thank you so much for allowing me to retell this story again. You allowed me to retell it a while ago, right around Halloween time, and I remember being so nervous because I wasn't good at this. I'm still not the best at it, you know, but I'm learning and I do feel a lot more confident in my abilities. So I really hope that I did it justice for you. Knowing Steve like I do now too, it's like, it had to have hit him that something was wrong immediately. I mean, wouldn't it hit anybody that something's wrong? That's the whole thing with these kids, is that the fear kind of gets you before you even know the kids are around, before your doorbell even rings, before, it's like you get hit with this overwhelming and visceral kind of primal gut instinct of fear, and then the doorbell rings, and then someone knocks on your window. That didn't seem to happen with Steve. But then again, he wasn't totally focused. If you're at home watching TV, you're focusing on the TV, but your mind's kind of wandering, you're more relaxed. Steve was in the middle of the night in an industrial area trying to pack all of this stuff into this tiny little car, this tiny little trunk, and just get home for the night. Probably very overtired, you know, probably a little frustrated he couldn't get the stuff in. His mind was distracted, and I'm wondering if that's why this overwhelming sense of fear did not hit him like it normally does people, especially Steve. You know, he has a lot of psychicness about him. So I just want to go over a couple little things of what are they, and I promise you guys I'm going to pick this back up very soon. I just didn't know what to give you guys for this because half my stuff was missing, more than half. So luckily I had this left. So here are a couple of theories that I've come across that I'm going to briefly discuss, and we'll move into part 2 and cover all of this in depth. I'm going to give you more stories. I'm just going to rewatch my videos and write the script from that. So the first theory I want to discuss with you, I found very, very interesting, and it's an old Iroquois legend that says the Iroquois Indians believed in a dark power called the Atkan that could take over children. They also believed in an evil one who would mate with human females to produce black-eyed, chalky-skinned children. Quote, these children were killed by the tribe soon after birth and burned to stop them from resurrecting. Children wandering alone in the woods could also be taken over by Atkan and would re-emerge with black eyes and pale skin, acting nervously while repeating themselves over and over. Their goal was to destroy the tribe and infect all of the people with Atkan. End of quote. Now, while I've come across tons, dozens and dozens of stories of black-eyed kids who did keep saying, like, let us in your house, they would say other things in between that. Steve's is very unique in that way, where she just kept going on and didn't speak to Steve at all, just about him, which was very, very crazy. Normally they'll repeat themselves, come on, mister, you gotta let us in your car, This was very unique. And, you know, at times he says that he looks back and feels bad. Did he leave 2 young girls? You know, was his mind playing tricks on him? No, it wasn't. Thank goodness you had the wherewithal and the forethought to get the heck out of there. I mean, can you picture our Steve Stockton jumping into a tiny little Mazda Miata and like curb jumping to get away from 2 preteen girls? There had to have been something going on there. Now, we've spoken about the hybrid program, alien hybrids, the reality of extraterrestrial and human hybrid programs, breeding programs, just in a part 1 of that video. I've got a part 2 coming out of that as well. So another theory is that these children are the result of alien abductions and are alien-human hybrids of some kind. Think about how abductees describe the eyes of the aliens who abduct them. Think of the pictures you've seen of the Greys. When talking about the Greys, we now know there's plenty more aliens out there than the Greys. I'm specifically talking about them at the moment. This large, all black as ink, insect-like eyes. I like to take this theory one step further and dare to wonder if the people who are getting visits are perhaps knowingly or unknowingly abductees who were used in these experiments, and the children that visit them are in fact their own children who have gone rogue somehow, who were part of a different hybrid program that has something different in mind, and there's something evil going on here. I've always thought in my head, but I've only come across once or twice in certain comment sections of videos surrounding the BEK is this. What if the black-eyed kids are children who at one point or another disappeared and were never found again? Is it possible that something happened to them and now this is what they are, whatever they are? Are they somehow damned souls for whatever reason? There are people also that they are children of the Nephilim, I believe, and I didn't write that down, but it just popped into my head, so more on that. Yet another theory is that these kids are somehow connected to the Men in Black phenomenon, which, as you guys know, is another one that simply fascinates me and I just can't get enough research on. I can't find much info to back this theory up, except the word black being in the title, the fact that they're paranormal and or supernatural phenomenon, and a couple of stories where people have claimed to have seen men in black pull up to pick up the black-eyed kids. But a lot of those stories are also the stories where the people claim to have granted entry and access to their home, which again, I don't really believe any of those stories. I believe one story where the woman ran into the store, ran back in her car, and a BEK was sitting next to her son. That's the only entrance story I believe. If you guys know of any other ones, I'm going to give my email at the end for your paranormal and supernatural encounter stories. So send it to me if you know different, or leave it in the comment section. I've read a few stories where there was a loud popping sound heard either before or after an encounter with these beings. So could they be interdimensional travelers? I'm still unsure about that, although this popping sound is heard quite often in the woods when people claim to have entered what they thought was another realm or another dimension and have suddenly been approached by something that seems like it came from somewhere else. There's nothing to say this noise is associated with any of that, though. It's just becoming more and more common in all of the research that I'm doing with people in the woods. Many people have come forward claiming to have heard this popping noise right before the forest went quiet and they had some kind of supernatural or even extraterrestrial encounter. And again, I'll do more research here. It is becoming, like I was saying, more and more common right before the woods go dead and someone encounters a glimmer man or a probably vampire woman sneaking up on them, or whatever the case is. This popping noise seems to happen all at once, very quickly, very loudly, and first. Then the woods go quiet, all the animal life goes quiet, there are no sounds at all, not even the wind blowing. They have their encounter, and then quick popping, very loud again, and all's right with the world again, and it was like nothing ever happened. I couldn't find much on the black-eyed kids being time travelers. I've heard a lot of people say it, but there's, again, nothing to back it up. There's nothing to even remotely try and substantiate this. But I've heard more than once that the BEK aren't really themselves time travelers, but they force others from the future to time travel for them. How and why is still unclear, so stay tuned for that as well. I know it's going to leave you all hanging, this video, and again, I'm sorry. And I know you're going to be like, you apologize too much and this and that, but I don't like putting out subpar content, but I don't like putting out no content. And I was shocked to find that my research is gone. It was just here. It wasn't even a week ago. It was actually Friday when Steve and I did Campfire Tales. So 4 nights ago when I double checked this because I was going to film it Sunday. And since I couldn't, I'm filming it tonight, which is Tuesday. I don't know when it's going to be put out, hopefully Friday, but it was just here 4 days ago. All 3 pages of both BEK scripts. So again, I'm going to go back into my video and take out what I didn't cover here tonight, get you guys a good part 2, BEK part 2 video, and move from there. Also, guys, my part 2s of a lot of the more recent videos are also coming out. The white-eyed kids, the alien hybrid program. I have more alien abductions coming out, more on the men in black, more on cursed objects. My demonic possession series is going to start in the fall, and it's pretty darn long. It might go all through winter. So that's all I have for you today, guys. Please be sure and give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it, if you enjoyed hanging out and spending this time with me. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and spread the love by sharing this video. Also, please check out the description box for some important links. Fireside Chats on Sunday night on Missing Persons and Mysteries with me and Steve Stockton. Stemma. A link to Real Evil with me and Steve Stockton on Dezombified's channel on Wednesday nights, and Campfire Stories on Missing Persons and Mysteries, Stemma again, me and Steve Stockton, on Friday nights. Also, Justice for Caleb Smith, that's going to also be in the description box. That's the 2-hour-long live interview Steve Stockton and I did on Campfire Stories with April Arrington, Caleb Smith's mother. We're trying to get some justice for that family. We're trying to get together to start that podcast, raise some funds for them, get them an attorney, get them a billboard, get them whatever they need, private investigators, whatever. No mother should have to investigate the death of her own son, and law enforcement dropped the ball for whatever reason. Also, links to donate to the channel through PayPal or Patreon. Guys, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me, always supporting me. I love and appreciate every single one of you. all of the support you give me on a regular basis. Make sure and be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything and can make you feel so good. Kindness is like forgiveness. It's for the person who's doing it. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger, and I'll catch you guys next time. Have your best day. Have your best night. Mwah. Bye-bye.